President of the United States. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I just want to thank Brian Yang, who legitimately may have been the original Yang Gangster. Such an OG that when I declared I was running for president, he put a Yang 2020 banner as his Facebook landing page, and then people contacted him saying, "You're running for president?" And then he said, "No, it's my friend Andrew," because this was early 2018. But Brian saw it before anyone else, and then the gang has grown and grown, and here we are. Also want to thank Sydney, Terry Young for putting this together, this incredible dinner series. Give them a round of applause. And also I want to acknowledge and thank my lovely wife Evelyn, who's here tonight. Anyone thanks me for running for president, I say thank my wife, because she has been the superhero in our family, the rock, holding everything together while I've been campaigning around the country. So it's such a joy to have you with me, baby. It's like, it's been a long time coming. And I will say, Evelyn, in true white fashion, was like, "Hey, you need to kick a little more ass for me to join you on the trail." And I was like, "All right, I get it." She's like, "None of this 1% shit." That's not the way Evelyn talks. So I openly acknowledge I'm something of an accidental presidential candidate. I never intended to run, and I have the fashion choices to prove it from my high school days, and also a partner to prove it, because Evelyn would have run screaming if she thought that the guy she was dating was going to run for president at some point. My parents met at UC Berkeley here in California, so we have very deep California roots. I know Brian went to Berkeley. Anyone else here go to Berkeley? Go Bears! Go Bears! So my parents met at Berkeley. My brother is named after the Lawrence Observatory, so we used to joke that my parents must have had a good time there. I was born in upstate New York in a town called Schenectady. Grew up in upstate New York and then closer to the city. Went to high school in New Hampshire. Very handy to run for president, turns out. Then I went to college at Brown University. I know Terry's a Brown parent. Anyone else here go to Brown? That's cool. When I'm in New Hampshire, I say that. Actually, there's a Brown grad pops up somewhere. Didn't know what to do, so I went to law school. Was an unhappy lawyer for 5 whole months. Thought that was not a great job. And so I left to start a business that had its mini rise and maximum fall. And I think that what's animating this campaign is the same spirit that's animating the NOLJA dinner series and animates this entire town and community. How many of you all are creatives or artists? And certainly if you're a chef, you should have your hand up, because there's nothing more creative and artistic than that. Well, this town is the kind of place where people can come together and say, "Hey, I've got an idea for a screenplay, a TV show, a restaurant." And sometimes they actually become real. Not every time, because that's not the way I work, so I know where I go. It's just like a lot of things come together and then they don't reach fruition. But sometimes in this town, magical things happen. And that is what drove me in my 20s, trying to build this business and floundering, just like many of you have had things that have not succeeded. But I got bitten by the bug in my 20s, and I kept at it over and over again, and became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the US. Was bought by a bigger company in 2009. I met Evelyn actually right after I joined that company. And it's funny, when you start doing something that you're excited about that's working for you, it makes you much better able to have a meaningful relationship. Like during my 20s when my companies were not working, my relationships were also not working. And I don't think that's unusual. It's like if your professional pursuits are not stable, then your relationships tend not to be that stable either. But then I became the head of this education company that I put my heart and soul into. I was so lucky to find Evelyn during that time. And then after my company was bought, I said, well, this world needs more entrepreneurship. I was the wake of the financial crisis, and I thought that we had way too many young kids trying to become Wall Street wizards and now Silicon Valley tech geniuses. And so I started this nonprofit called Venture for America. And this, I think, was the biggest divergence in my path, where before that, I think I was a fairly normal Asian dude, kind of did well at school. Even the startup thing, like leaving the law firm and then trying to start up, that's not that weird. It's like you have friends who did that. Right. It got weird when I decided to quit my job and start this nonprofit. And the thought process at the time was, well, I think I can help solve this problem. If I bust my butt, I think I can start a significant organization. And a lot of people try and do this in their later stages of their career. And I was like, I'll just do it a little earlier. You know, it's like do it in the middle instead of the end. It'll be a great learning experience. I have to say, starting a building venture for America was more of a challenge than I originally realized it was going to be. And that's true of, raise your hand again if you're an artist or a creative, or, so you know what I mean. It's like, you think, oh, this is going to be like the last thing, and then a lot of the times it's like harder and different. So that was certainly my experience running Venture for America, but it grew and grew to a point where we helped create thousands of jobs around the country. And I saw a lot of the country I'd never seen before, because I grew up in upstate New York, went to school in the Northeast. How many of you all are from California? How about the Midwest? West, South? Northeast like me? Yeah, so I spent 7 years helping entrepreneurs grow businesses in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans, and cities I'd never been to, frankly. And I was staggered by the gulf between those regions and Manhattan or San Francisco or Los Angeles in many respects, where when you fly between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, you feel like you're crossing dimensions and decades and ways of life instead of just a few time zones. And so I was digesting that for 7 years, and then Donald Trump became our president in 2016. I'm going to guess most of you were not excited with that outcome. If you were excited, you know, I was going to say you're in the wrong place. We're excited because I'm going to beat his ass. And,
let's go!
Well, I guess it's about a year from now. Look at that. He's got about a year before I come for him. So, he gets elected, and I'm just like, wow. Tens of millions of Americans decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star. Like, that's really broken. That's deeply messed up. And so when I started digging into the numbers, I thought this is a straight automation story, that we're blasting away millions of manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, all the swing states you needed to win, and did win. And any of you work in technology? So if you work in tech, you know that what we did to the manufacturing jobs, we're now doing to the retail jobs, and the call center jobs, and the fast food jobs, and the truck driving jobs, and on through the economy. And for whatever reason, our country did not seem to understand that we're in the midst of this economic transformation. We were scapegoating immigrants for problems immigrants had nothing to do with, and technology is going to push more and more Americans to the side. So this is what I'm realizing in 2017, and this is what got me to run for president. So I looked up again and I said, I think I can help America understand what's happening, and I think I can advance meaningful solutions that help push us toward an economy that will actually be sustainable in the 21st century. And sometimes people, again, thank me for running, and I say, it's like, well, if you thought you could potentially advance your country's understanding of the greatest problems of this era and potentially accelerate the eradication of poverty, and you don't do that, you're a very small human being. You know what I mean? It's like, I had this instinct that if I put everything into it, that I could actually help move our country forward. And it's really thanks to people like you and Brian and folks who saw that we could make this happen together that I've been proven right. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. But like a good son of immigrants, the more successful we get, the greedier I get. So it's not enough to make the debates. It's not enough to have CNN anchors say, hey, automation, sort of a problem. What do you think, Senator Warren? You know, like this is not enough. What we have to do is take this case to the highest levels of this country, win elections, and then actually rewrite the rules of our economy so that it works for the average American. And if you're here tonight, you are not the average American. Most of you probably realize that at some point over the last number of years. Though, even at the peak of our meritocracy, which most of you are at, it doesn't always feel like life is easy or that we've somehow won this incredible competition. because our expenses are high and we have kids and there are always problems and we're competing against folks that are just like us. So you're like looking at it being like, oh, it's like, you know, your kid's pretty smart there. you know, you get trapped in the context. But if you get your head up and you start going to other parts of the country, you realize that we are not the normal Americans at all. When I was growing up in upstate New York, I thought everyone's dad had a PhD. And I asked my friends, like, oh, what's your dad's PhD? And then I learned the hard way, like, they pummel me. No, it's not. Like that, I thought that was normal. Our little boys, Christopher and Damien, think it's normal for their dad to be on TV. I have no idea dad's running for president, really. They're like, Mom, this is boring, change the channel. It's like, hey, you gotta watch your dad debate. They're like, ah. So, we all have a different version of normal than the lived experience of the vast, vast majority of Americans. And I've now been to Iowa 22 times, I've been to New Hampshire 22 times. I joke that they're like my kids, where if I visit one, I have to visit the other. But 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half of Americans can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. And when you go to them and you say something like, hey, we need to fight climate change, a lot of them just have their heads down and they're like, I can't pay next month's rent. Like, I can't think about big problems like that. And then what's the natural human reaction? I guess that problem is just not that serious anyway, whether it's made up or, you know, like that's the mindset of scarcity that is winning in this country. That's what got Donald Trump elected. And unfortunately, that mindset of scarcity is just going to accelerate and pick up as AI leaves the lab and replaces 2.5 million call center workers who make $14 an hour. 30% of America's stores and malls, because Amazon soaks up another $20 billion in business every year. Like, this is going to turn us against each other more and more. Our media industrial complex does not care. Our government does not care. It's going to be up to people like us to make the case that we can do better, and we must do better. How many of you all are parents like me and Evelyn? So if you're a parent like me and Evelyn, and one of our boys is on the autism spectrum, you've probably seen us talk about that. But if you're a parent, you've had this unfortunate sensation that the world we're leaving to our kids is darker than the lives that we have led as their parents. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And it's true. The world we're leaving them is darker than the lives we've led. I know when I reflect on growing up in upstate New York in the 70s, I remember like the 3 TV networks and like just turning them on and thinking like, okay, like this is what it is to be American. Like I think I get it. And then now there's this cacophony and information silos, and you have Americans just getting the news from one source or another, and we can't agree on basic facts. Climate change is bearing down, and here in California, you all are experiencing some of the worst of it. And these problems can't be erased no matter how successful you are individually. Like, even if you're wealthy, climate change is a disaster and existential threat. The fact that our kids can't turn away from the screens and the smartphones, you know, like it doesn't matter how successful you are if your kids aren't strong and healthy. So some of the problems that our kids are inheriting, we can solve for if we come together and advance solutions that other Americans, other parents will be able to see themselves and their families in. Now, I tell people I'm not running for president because I fantasize about being president of the United States. If there were ways to solve the problem that actually did not involve becoming president, I'd be very, very open to them. But like so many of you here in this room, I'm a parent, I'm a patriot. I believe we can do better, and with your help, we will do better. So thank you all very, very much. So in this context, I'd love to be able to talk to each of you individually, get some pictures next to an appropriate backdrop, circulate around. Because I know in this context, like we're seated, and so you things like, oh, I'm not sure if it's like cool just to get up and say, hey, so if we don't have some time individually together, just like make sure and find me. I want to be able to meet each of you individually and just be able to thank you in person. And let's thank the hosts again for tonight. Thank you all. Actually, if you have any questions, feel free to raise them now. Take advantage of this intimate setting. I see that guy a fair amount. So. I'll go back to you.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I just wanted to say that the technology plan is brilliant. I thought your op-ed and the plan and just the way that rolled out was so powerful. And I'm kind of interested to know how you guys are going to deploy that and utilize it, maybe ads or targeted, using some of the points in it.
Thank you. So last night Evelyn and I had drinks with Lisa Ling, and she was talking about how concerned she is that technology is warping our kids' minds. And you know, the parents that are most vigilant about not letting their kids use technology are the technologists in Silicon Valley. I don't know if you all knew that. So you go to Silicon Valley and they're like completely cordoned off screens in their households. They send their kids to Waldorf schools where like no screens allowed. So they know, they get it. And the goal is to make the case to folks in Silicon Valley. And I'm happy to say, you probably noticed, I've been endorsed by Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey and Sam Altman and Alexis Ohanian, essentially like the rational humanist techies, who, and some of them have said flat out, Elon said to me, he's like, look, we have one set of incentives in AI, and that's to go as fast as possible, because there are 5 of us competing against each other, and so we have to race. And he's like, but you do not want to just have us racing in AI, because if we go too fast, one of us is going to do something that's really disastrous and negative. And so the government should actually give us some guardrails on this. And if you listen to that, you're like, wait a minute, the techies asking for guardrails from the government? And so you know if they're doing that, then we're in like a whole new landscape. Because historically, techies have not been open to that sort of thing. And it's not just Elon, some of the others have said very similar things to me, where they're looking like, why am I making a decision that should be made by the state or society or the government, where essentially these tech companies have become quasi-state organizations themselves, and a lot of them are very open to a real partnership with an intelligent government that's not someone who's just looking to put burdensome regulations on them, but actually wants to solve a problem. So this is the message to techies, and I'm happy to say a lot of the techies are very open to it. And the 3 biggest organizations to contribute to my campaign, number 1 is Google, number 2 is Amazon, and number 3 is the US Army, to give you a sense. So there are people in technology who agree with the fact that we need to come together and actually put down some guardrails. Other questions? Yeah?
I'm in a fight with my brother-in-law about this, Jordan. Why do you support a universal basic income and not a negative income tax?
I would love a negative income tax. And if that's where we land, that would be phenomenal. Jamie Dimon came out for a negative income tax just the other month. This is like the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He said 2 things. 1, we should declare a national emergency over the fact the economy is not working for the average American. And 2, we should have a negative income tax in the United States. He also said we should have a Marshall Plan to try and rebuild the US economically. And I joked with him, I was like, hey Jamie, we should just call it the Diamond Plan and do it. And then he was like, ha ha ha. So anyway. So what you can say is your brother-in-law? You can tell your brother-in-law, Andrew Yang loves a negative income tax. If we land there, it would be great. The reason why I prefer a dividend to a negative income tax is that if you look at the administration of the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, about 30% of the people that are entitled to it don't get it because they don't file it, they don't understand it. And there's also a massive timing of payments issue, where if my car breaks down today and you tell me, hey, next spring you're going to get a refund of a couple $1,000s, you're like, well, it doesn't help me repair my car and get to work. So I prefer a dividend because of both the administration and the timing of payments, but it's essentially like a sibling to a negative income tax. If we landed on a negative income tax, I'd be thrilled.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. But tell your brother-in-law it's a totally smart, legitimate question. Yes?
So when you think about I've come from the tech industry, think about the digital divide. And what can the government actually do about it? I get regulations around privacy or AI. And even in my own company, when we would apply technology, we're going to of the frontline workforce out each year. Without mention, hundreds of thousands of jobs. And so, I happen to innovate in the legal space and take a few lawyers out as well. But
I'm looking at you either.
I see. The concern that we will actually retrain everyone because we have the resources to do so. Retrain everyone for new jobs even if they're outside the company, and we'll set up programs for retraining. But that's very expensive to do. And a significant amount of profitability, you can't really afford to do that.
Yeah.
What can you actually do in government knowing that in technology, if you're doing your job correctly, you'll be making things more efficient that takes out jobs? I get regulating privacy and AI and on the guardrails, but that doesn't actually create jobs. So how do we redeploy, re-educate the workforce? What's the plan for that?
Well, thank you for being forthright about your work. And one of the things I say to folks is, look, it is ridiculous to hold an innovator accountable for something that happens 10 states away. They're in a lab trying to make their innovation work. They can't roam around the rest of society and figure out all the downstream effects. It's not their job to either. Whose job is it? Our governments, theoretically. It's just we're so accustomed to our government being 20 years behind or 30 years behind that we can't imagine our government actually figuring out, hey, if you automate these jobs away, it's going to be a real problem for hundreds of thousands of people in Ohio. So the digital divide is going to be with us for quite some time. And when you talk about the digital divide, there's some like low-hanging fruit that you could say that this is not addressing your problem, but I'm just going to say it because it's relevant. I've been to rural parts of this country that don't have broadband access because it doesn't actually pay for the broadband, the ISPs, the broadband companies, or the Verizon of the world to actually lay the pipe to get those homes broadband because they're not going to get paid back in a reasonable time frame. And so the rural legislators there are like, hey, we need broadband access in rural Iowa, rural northern New Hampshire. And I say, yeah, we should get you broadband access because, it's at this point, to me, a vital part of being participant in the 21st century economy. But then there's this misconception that if they have broadband access, it will actually result in jobs in those communities. The reality is that the broadband access in those communities will likely just mean that they can download videos faster and just watch things with more ease and connect to people, but that's not going to create jobs. So we should create the incentives so that 99.9% of the country has broadband access. It's actually very easy. The digital divide that you're describing is much more fundamental. And it becomes even more dramatic when you realize that AI is going to start doing basic coding in what? Someone who works in technology. What do you think that time frame is? Somebody said now? Now? Yeah, I would say, if not now, very, very soon. And so we're chasing a set of goalposts that are moving. And it's been something that's been a revelation for me over these last number of months, is where if you talk to someone in policy about this, what they'll say is like, hey, we need to educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. We need to move our education system towards bridging the digital divide. And then you say, yeah, we should do those things. But if you dig into the numbers, we're successful at that, let's call it 15 to 20% of the time. So what do we do with the other 80 to 85%, which is what you're describing? If you're able to retrain some of those workers, let's call it 20%, then that's a massive victory, and the government should be helping make that happen. But the government also needs to start accounting for the 80% that's not going to work for. And right now, that 80% is getting increasingly angry, distressed, self-destructive, where suicides and drug overdoses have now reached unprecedented heights to the point that America's life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row. And this, to me, is a sign of how deep the problems are. So if I was a normal politician, I would say, hey, we need to bridge the digital divide, we need to invest in blah, 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 blah. We do. But even if we did a great job of that, we would probably successfully retrain and re-enable about 20% of the people that are going to be displaced. And so the bigger question is, what do we do with the other 80%? And then that becomes a massive rewriting of the rules of the 21st century economy so that it actually works for people who, frankly, will never become coders, maybe aren't exceptional at some of the skills that we associate with the 21st century, we actually have to reimagine what success in the 21st century economy looks like. And one of the examples I use is that we have this SAT that we use to try and measure our kids' performance. We invented the SAT during World War II as a means of identifying which kids we did not want to send to the front lines. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. And so now we treat our kids like every year is wartime. We like just lay the SAT over all of them. So instead of those kinds of cognitive skills that are preparing them for an economy that doesn't exist anymore, we need to lean into social emotional learning and the arts and financial literacy and things that they would actually get excited about. And this is not feel good. This actually has much higher impact on their success in life by the data. Artists have the same effect on a community as entrepreneurs do. I don't know if you knew that. That if artists show up someplace, you can mark it down that property values there will rise. So if you're an artist, you should know that about yourself. And yet we all know that arts education is the first thing to go in a school environment. So to me, instead of trying to lean into turning everyone into a coder, we actually have to try and humanize the economy and then also humanize our educational system to follow suit.
Andrew, we do one more, and then dinner's gonna come out. So.
Oh yeah, I certainly don't want to stand between you and food.
You are.
I really am? Oh, that's terrible.
One more.
All right.
Or no? Oh yeah.
Yes.
So what convinced you to exclude universal basic income from your first big ad buy?
Ooh.
Well, if you look at it, it's there. This is not as emphasized. So how many of you saw the ad we put out last week that we put 7 figures behind? It's good fun. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out, see what he's talking about. So what we've been doing is running polls on the early states in particular, Iowa and New Hampshire, to figure out what they got excited about me and the campaign. And it turns out that most people really liked universal basic income a lot more after they understood who I was and why I was championing it. And so the first move that they wanted to make was to introduce me, my campaign, my family to some extent, in that vision, and then follow it up with something that was more focused on universal basic income. And to this question, and Evelyn and I have these conversations all the time, Zach too, to a lesser extent, I thought that this campaign would be all about universal basic income to the highest degree, because I thought to myself it'd be like such a no-brainer. It's like Americans look at us and be like, what? Like, that's the greatest thing ever. Just like, do that yesterday. I just tweeted, an hour ago, I was like, I'm literally trying to give everybody money.
It might be your best tweet ever.
All right. So I figured it would just take off because of that, and I was wrong. And it was a neuroscientist in Seattle who said to me, the enemy of universal basic income is the human mind, because our minds are wired for resource scarcity, especially if you're making time-money trade-offs every single day, where you're like, oh, if I take a couple hours here, I can save $1 here, then I can maybe spend this money and not spend that money. And so then if the magical Asian man shows up and is like, everyone should get $1,000 a month, like, it actually doesn't fit in with their lived experience, their worldview, and they don't look at it and say, oh, I should do that immediately. They actually struggle with that. So it turns out if you give them a sense of who I am and the fact like, hey, economy's changing, like, I think we should do this, they actually become open to it, but they need to get a sense of me before the idea, which blew my mind, because originally you'd think, like, of course they're just going to embrace it. But the same thing happened to me with Venture for America. I thought Venture for America would speak for itself too. It's like, hey, we're trying to train young people to become job creators and entrepreneurs in distressed parts of the country. Like, who could not be for that? And what I found out was that, and this is true in all of your works too, those of you who like your job, if you're an artist or a chef, they have to care about you before they care about your work. Really interesting. I learned that with Venture for America, and I was like, someone said to me, it's like, hey, for Venture for America to get here, people actually have to, like, think of Andrew Yanning is also here. And I was like, no, like, they don't need that. But then it turned out that they were probably right. And the same is true with universal basic income. It turns out that I thought universal basic income would be up here, and that as soon as you just put it up there, then like everyone would take it and run with it. But people listen to other people more than they listen to ideas. And so in order for someone to actually accept the idea, they have to accept the person bringing them the idea first. So that's why we spent $1 million on an ad that made it seem like, you know, I came from, I mean, if you saw the ad, I don't want to give it away. We have some jokes about the ad in the office where it looks like it's like, he came from the planet Krypton. An X-shaped spaceship. He landed. Andrew Yang. That's a pretty good imitation of the ad. Oh, thank you. Thank you all so much. I can't wait to meet you all in Disney.
One more big round of applause for Andrew. All right, so we're going to get the dinner started. Ted Young, and have you guys, all right.
The money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.